Okay. Good evening. Call to order the Citizens Budget Review Advisory Committee for Monday, August 8th, 2016. Would you all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Cindy, roll call, please.
Deanna Farmer, excused absence. Michael Frank, excused absence. Harry Hall.
Here.
Sergio Moda.
Here.
Tim Slavin.
Here.
Terry Taylor.
Here.
Ed Herlihy.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next item, approval of the minutes for June 28th, July 11th, and August 1st. Could I hear a motion, please?
Motion.
And a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, that's approved. Next item, unfinished business. An update from Mr. Kilgore, Administrative Services Director, on budget recommendations. Mr. Kilgore, you are on board.
Good evening. Brought my water this time. Okay, this is essentially the same PowerPoint presentation that I had presented previously to the Budget Committee. I've added some changes that we'll go over, so I'm going to be skipping over some of the parts that are just redundant from what I said before, but try to bring you all up to date on some happenings that have occurred since even our last meeting, and some things we got resolved. So I want to explain to you why the city manager's recommended millage rate to the city council that will be covered this Wednesday night is still the same 3.8556, and our rationale behind that. So personnel cost, or the total budget did decrease on what we have appropriated by $75,623. We had the pay and benefits are still allocated at the 3%. Those negotiations are continuing. We did have a completion of our RFP on medical insurance, or actually medical, dental, and vision. And what we are proposing and what will be presented to the City Council Wednesday night would be a $230,000 savings. So the cost of the plan that and the alternative that we are looking at would be $230,000 less than we allowed for in the budget at the 15% rate. Won't go into the positions again. Operating costs, same story as before. Capital transfers, same story as before. Pretty much how we went about balancing the budget and the assumptions or presumptions that we made. As far as what's left out, as I said, we still have the 3% for pay raises, subject to negotiation. We've got the $230,000 savings from the employee health insurance, but we've also completed the review of proposals for covering the city on liability and workers' compensation insurance. And there's the company that we are recommending is on the agenda for Wednesday night to the City Council to approve, but there would be a $50,000 savings by going through that process. So I'm quite excited about that the RFP did result in a downward slope to our premium curve than rather than what we're typically used to with the upward. Golf course, I think I went over the golf course, the airport, and building fund, enterprise funds previously. Unless you have questions, I won't get back into that. Pretty much the same story on many of our special revenue funds. As part of your packet, there was a little cheat sheet that we are presenting to the City Council Wednesday night because they instructed us to come back with options on going for a millage rate less than the 3.8556. So following their directions, we are presenting three options, one going with the, keeping it to 3.8556, one going with the rollback rate, and then one in the midpoint between that at 3.7 mils. So we, in doing that, we're saying, well, a way that we can get down to the $176,000 of less revenue than we currently have in our recommendation is to apply 50,000 of the health insurance savings, 50,000 for the group, for the liability and workers' comp savings, and the other piece, of course. The other piece is an increase to the amount we transfer from our stormwater fee revenues. We right now transfer about 62% of the actual cost to the general fund to offset where that division is budgeted in general fund for the operating and maintenance cost of the stormwater system. We are recommending that be increased to at least 70% of those costs to be paid out of the stormwater fees. I mean, the stormwater fees were designed to cover the cost of operation and maintenance of the stormwater utility that were basically taken care of through those fees. So we think it's appropriate, and then that would increase revenues coming into general fund by 50,000. So the sum of those three items would not affect really what we've already recommended on the expenditure side for general fund, and would allow a reduction of the millage to the rollback rate. Understand this is not staff's recommendation. We're still sticking with the 3.8556, and we'll talk about that a little bit further here. I'll sum it up a little bit further. But part of that plan is while we're at it, we should also do some shifting in the way some of the expenses in the CRA fund are being handled. We've loaded up the funding coming in to the CRA fund with operation and maintenance type cost as opposed to real brick and mortar type improvements that might enhance those values, which is really what a CRA is designed for, is to make that area grow in property value. So to help accomplish that, right now we are allocating monies to have a kitty basically to be able to award sewer hookup grants. There's already an ample balance, but we're saying any future appropriations, rather than using CRA funds to increase those appropriations, that it would be a legitimate and logical thing to do is to take that out of monies that are allocated for the lagoon improvements. Going back, so to kind of bring you up to speed on that, going back to the 3.8556 when we in the committee recommended that additional millage, 100,000 of that was allocated then to be transferred for lagoon improvements. Our actual expenses on lagoon improvements have gone to the membership fee and the Indian River Lagoon Council, about $11,000 to match grants to do the oyster mat programs. But there again, those monies are accumulating. So we're suggesting let's go ahead and utilize that $100,000 being transferred out of general fund to support sewer hookup grants too, in the sense that those are also an environmental help to the lagoon. The other big thing that's being paid for out of the CRA though is the public lighting, the street lights and lights in the park down there, paying the electric bill for those, paying for janitorial costs for the restroom facilities at the park, and the landscaping contract, where we've got a contractor doing the landscaping up and down Indian River Drive and in our right-of-ways, as well as the park. So as I said, the effect on the stormwater utility fund is to allocate monies to the sewer grant program and to adjust the transfer that's going to general fund out of the stormwater utility fund and stormwater fees to a level of 70%. So that brings up the amount being transferred from $575,000 to $650,000. No change to some of the other funds. Our debt service funds are just as we had explained before. The analysis of the property tax at the 3.8556 is still the same. And to pretty much summarize it, we've still got the labor agreement negotiations to be determined, hopefully before our hearings in September. The other big question mark out there is the ballot on the DST, the discretionary sales tax, whether that continues. That's scheduled for November. Till we know the results of that, so it's still kind of iffy going into this budget year whether we'll have an ongoing source of revenues available to us from that source. And as just to summarize, we're still recommending the 3.8556. That gives us not only some cover in case the discretionary sales tax is a negative result. Should we have a storm? I mean, we've talked before about the amount of reserves and how the $5 million only covers a limited amount of citywide damages, and so it's kind of like insurance. You can't have too much. You know, when something does happen, you wish you would have had more. And there's the possibility of a future recession. You know, we've had a slow growth since we got out of the Great Recession, so we're thinking, like, you know, perhaps our time is coming sooner than later, and we should also be having that on our mind and certainly kind of beef up our reserves a bit. So the rollback rate with the 3.67 would equal $176,414, and was saying really from taking that from the three sources that we've identified and being able to go with the rollback rate if the city council insists, or that is an option for them. So I would take any questions you might have.
Gentlemen, questions? Mr. Taylor?
I was just going to point out that we had already addressed the possibility of shortfall with this emergency funding, and now we're looking at the city council's concern of additional options. Obviously, there's some additional fundings. Was there any further discussion, or was there any other points pointed out as far as city council being aware of the shortage of emergency fundings due to the previous discussion of this committee?
At the city council meeting, there wasn't really an opportunity to debate their direction to us. You know, they basically directed us as a group to come back to show options. So from staff's point of view, I mean, this gives them a few options that we're able to achieve without, severely cutting back on our staffing or other operating costs that we've allocated. So, I didn't get a chance, which this PowerPoint, as you saw from the heading, it will be what I use Wednesday night to try to underline that point to them, that the reserves are, at the $5 million level, but as we've seen from, well, some members didn't actually see the presentation. I think I shared it with you when you first came on board, but $5 million won't go extremely far if we have damages that are citywide over 30%. We would be squeaking by in a possibly very detrimental position as far as continuing our service levels. When you need the services the worst is when we would be faced with trying to make up ground, and of course then you also have the issue after you get through it, maybe a couple of years go by and you start rebuilding damages, get those back on the tax roll, get people paying their sales taxes and utility taxes, and restore our revenue stream. You've still got to think about, well, you've used your $5 million reserve, so then what about the next time? So, it puts you very much deep in the hole, whereas the more money you have available to weather whatever damages we do have, a lot less painful to try to recover.
And we're still faced with the same union negotiations that are scheduled as well.
Yes, we've had some preliminary meetings. I don't want to get into exactly what was covered because that wouldn't be appropriate. But we're hoping, actually the staff owes their side some revised wording to some of the contract language. We know what their position is. They know we're pretty much where we stand, so it's kind of up to us now to come back with the revised languages in those paragraphs and to try to reach some compromise between their position and our position. We're hoping that can happen in the not too distant future here. There again, before the September budget hearings would be our goal.
Thank you, Ken.
Mr. Hall?
Excuse me, Ken, if the discretionary sales tax were to sunset, what level of funding loss do you project that to be?
Right now, we take in about $2.8 million, I believe, a year, and most of it is allocated to the between police cars and special projects, grant matching programs for the airport. There's been a substantial benefit by having that source of revenue that if we had to live without it, the impact would be mostly back on general fund and between utility taxes, franchise fees, and ad valorem taxes, you're talking about the majority of the revenue stream right there. So we'd have to take some severe corrective measures to handle it.
And the health insurance, the premiums are being raised 15%. The benefits to the employees, are they being changed, or will they be at the same level, just the premium is going up?
To keep pretty much the same policy was more like a 16 plus type percentage increase as opposed to the 15%. The alternative that they presented to us that made the most sense to us is to make what we consider is pretty much a trade-off, because right now the employees aren't paying any percentage copay. Like typically with insurance and other entities, you see some kind of copay kick in, where they pay me 20% of the bill, the insurance picks up 80%. We are saying that we would take an option that after their deductible is met, which, remember, in our case, we provide them a card that can cover their total deductible expenses, but after that expenditure level is met, then they have a maximum out-of-pocket limit, which is double the deductible amount at this point. So a single coverage individual where the city's paying the entire premium, they have a $2,000 deductible, they get a health reimbursement card that covers that $2,000. They are subject currently to another $2,000 maximum out of pocket. Right now, it doesn't mean a lot, but under the new alternative, the difference between the deductible and the maximum out of pocket, they would be paying 20% of any cost beyond the deductible amount.
And when you say the alternative, you're talking about the one that you're proposing to go to now?
The one we're proposing with a little bit of change. I mean, I'm describing to you the current policy with 2,000 and a 4,000 cap to the employee. The alternative we're looking at would say, well, they pay the employee would pay 20% of those costs between the amount of deductible and the maximum out-of-pocket limit. Part of that is to increase the amount of the health reimbursement account to $2,500.
Okay.
So we would be giving them basically another $500. They are at risk for about, 20% of $2,000. They're at risk at $4,000 at 20%. So they could have a pretty hefty hospital stay, be paying most of that with their HRA card. So that's the concept. I'm not sure I got the exact numbers right as far
No,
as
that's answer
but
my
I mean,
question.
we still are told by our broker, the Gehring Group, that
That was my other
it's a
question,
premium
which-
policy. It's
True.
still, so it's not like some policies you see that everything after the deductible is shared 20%. If it's a $100,000 bill, you'd be on the hook for 20%, and we don't have that. We have a cap where the employee would only pay, and it's basically double for when you talk about family coverage or spouse coverage, kind of double all those numbers. So.
Okay, I understand it now. I guess you used Dustin with the Gehring Group.
Yes.
And last question would be on the city council. Last meeting I was at, there was one or two that expressed that they may have items that they would bring to the board that would impact the budget, obviously. Has anyone imparted any of their wish list, so to speak, to you yet, or any of your staff?
I have not received any information myself, no.
Okay.
Perhaps I will Wednesday night, I don't know.
So there is a little in the budget for some of their pet projects if they were to have some. Of course, it would take away some of the ones that you would suggest. So that little bit of extra there, I think, is going to be needed in case they come up with something. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Slavin? No questions? Mr. Mata? Well, now it's my turn. A few things after looking this over. First off, and it's been said by the Budget Committee before, and I'll state it again, when you look back at the financial history of Sebastian, say since just before the start of the recession in 2007 and going forward, this city got through it. It was tough, but it got through it and did very well. But there have been some lasting problems created by all the cutbacks, especially in the capital area. We ran equipment not only into the ground, but we buried it and tried to keep using it. And that keeps cropping up. We almost got to the point where our IT system was going to be non-existent or close to it. So we've fixed those things. There's more coming. But there's something else that's going on now that the recession technically is over. This city's growing. And if you don't think it's growing, just take yourself half, 3/4 of an hour and drive around. Everywhere you look, there's land being cleared and houses being built. And our building department, if you read the items at the end of this third quarter report, they're buried. They're busy as can be. And they're doing very well. And it just takes a quick look. If you go down Main Street, opposite the post office, we're going to have a whole bunch of houses in that development. So you've got that going on. That's growth. And that requires, or doesn't require, puts more pressure on city services. There are more things going on. There are more things that need to be done. And we have problems, especially the lagoon, going forward. One of the things that that's been talked about is this sewer grant program. Well, I contend that one of the problems with the sewer grant program is that it's the city's greatest secret. We don't tell anybody very much about it. Unless they watch the city council meeting, people don't know about it. So we need to publicize that, and I think we need to put more money into it, because there is absolutely no doubt, everybody says it, is that all the septic systems on the east side of the railroad end up in the lagoon. One way or another, it's going to end up in the lagoon. If you drive across the railroad tracks, you see the downslope at Main Street, at 512, so on and so forth, slopes right down into the lagoon. And there are still a lot of sewers along Indian River Drive that are septic. Anyhow, we're going to need funds for that. You see that kind of thing going with the growth. There's a possibility, and you touched on it, Ken, that DST won't get approved this November. There hasn't been much in the press about it, positive or negative. It'll be interesting to see what the school board gets in the August 30th primary, where they've got asking for a piece of the action. So we'd really be stuck, and the county would be stuck even worse if DST went away. So we need to think about that. You touched on economic slowdown. You throw a ball up in the air about what's going to happen after November, after this election. Who knows where we're headed? But there's a feeling that things may slow down. There are indicators out there. I'm not a pessimist, but that's a possibility. So, sum and substance, with all of that going on, I'd like to stick with the 3.8556. So that's my position on it. So, gentlemen, here's where we are. Ken's going to make a presentation to the city council on this Wednesday, and after that, this committee needs to say, are we going to stick with what we said when the millage rate was set, that we agreed in the majority, well, we all agreed, that this committee was going to recommend 3.8556. Are we going to stick with that? And that's where we are. What I would propose to do, once we decide that, I'm going to do a very abbreviated version of that PowerPoint that I did, just putting in why we think that we ought to stick with it. So, and I'm suggesting that the items that we would put on that we would touch on is the lagoon, building up the sewer fund, maybe giving more grant, improving the amount of the grant, the city growth, talk about that, and possible economic recession. Those are some points. If you got others, we'll gladly add it, but there are ideas. So at this point, to get this moving, I'll make a motion that we continue our support of 3.8556 and so tell the city council. There's the motion.
Second the motion.
There's a second motion. Discussion?
As far as discussion goes, I think we had this discussion the last meeting when we had a quorum, that the funds, or the city of Sebastian had the lowest tax rates in most of the states. And I would have to agree with the motion that our initial 3.8556 is in accordance with what we already pretty much came to the conclusion of.
Okay, anybody else? All right.
Well, I'd like to say,
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
always have something to say, sorry.
Fine, that's what we're here for.
I agree with what you just said, and I know one of the items we bring up all the time is a possible continuation of, or a setback into the recession. Personally, I think from an economic standpoint that we're moving forward, the likelihood of falling back in recession is unlikely in the short term. However, I do believe we have needs and that the current millage rate just meets those needs. In fact, maybe next year we might even need to consider an additional funding. But for right now, I think that we'd be prudent to stay with the current millage and not go with the rollback rate.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Any other comments? All right, let's put it up.
Public,
What?
you want to hear the
Oh.
public?
No, the public does not want to speak. Okay, thank you, Ken. Okay, we've got a motion on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 It's, any opposed? No opposed? It's unanimous. Okay, to bring this to the city council, I will very quickly tomorrow morning put together the PowerPoint, send it to Ken, who will get it right out to you. Please take a look at it, because you've got tomorrow until 4:30. Sorry about that, but this budget process is awfully condensed. And because as soon as it's approved, I've got to send the PowerPoint into the city and get it into the system so that we can show it here on Wednesday. So I'll get that out as quick as I can tomorrow morning. If you've got comments, get them to Ken, so he can feed them back to me and we can make changes, something you don't agree with, or something you want to add, anything like that, please do it. Okay, that covers that thing. Thank you. Next item, new business. Presentation by Mr. Kilgore on the third quarter budget. Mr. Kilgore.
Okay, in your packets, I provided the standard formatting of our quarterly report. This will be going to the city council again on Wednesday night. We cover all the budget changes that we made during the quarter. Most of those have to do with unexpected kind of repair items where we shifted accounts around between between the departments, allocation. A couple of things the city council has already approved. I've listed those, as well as some additional approvals, mostly having to do with the renewal and replacement reserve account that we established, where we are committed to come back to them with approvals of any use of those funds. So I've detailed that out. I did, on those copies I made for most of you there, I did have a line there on the cemetery division that was not appropriate. I shouldn't have had that on there, so I struck through that one. Ed, I don't know if you have that one or not. It's the adjustment to the cemetery division accounts to fix a broken irrigation pump. And even the number amount there right in the middle of the page was kind of overprinted. My intent was to just delete the line, but it didn't happen, so. Okay, on the next page is where I show you some graphics, generally about those. The general fund revenues are coming in and are at a strong level after the first 9 months of operation at 77.62%. Has been collected. Department spending is at 75.15. So if you figure we're 75% through the budget, they're right on the money. So we present the capital projects where they stand and where we are on some of our significant revenue sources in the special revenue funds. We tell you that the debt service and long-term debt obligations that we have, we're paying those on schedule and are in compliance. As far as the golf course, the figures this year are distorted because of the major irrigation project. As you recall, that was a loan from the building fund to the golf course, but it is inflating the amount of expenditures. They are showing probably at the end of this year an increase in their deficit because they'll have this repayment debt recorded back to the building fund. So it's not necessarily a cash flow issue, but it is an accounting, well, the only word is deficit for an enterprise fund. Their total expenditures are greater than their revenues over time. With the airport fund, they've had a pretty successful year. They are actually have increased their reserve amounts to about $46,000, mostly because they're supported by the DST funds, the discretionary sales tax, which has provided them matching funds to do a lot of their capital improvements. Building fund, as Ed touched on earlier, we're having an active year as far as number of permits coming in. If you recall back to the budget a little bit, the building department is adding a part-time inspector, and that'll be funded, with approval of the budget starting October 1st. That should help with their workload. We provide you all the detailed fund summaries showing revenues and expenses for each fund. On page, at the bottom, its references at page 83 through 321 shows you the 75% expended, and you can look back to see all the various departments and where they stand individually. On page 84 of 321, the capital project status report. I do a little tally at the bottom of that sheet that shows of all the capital projects we have going. And remember, some of these are multi-year, so they carry over from previous years into the year that we're operating under. But the amount expended of all those appropriations is 50.52% at June 30th. If you also incorporate the amount of encumbrances, you know, those contracts we've let that have obligated those funds, but it hadn't yet been spent, then we're up to about 63% of all our current projects are in the process. So considering that you've still got some that are pretty large grant reimbursement type projects like Tulip Avenue that just recently got approved to begin that project. So I think we're starting to finally have something good to show about our success with completing capital projects. On page 85 of 321 is where I show the amount of cash and investments. We still have about $11 million in total cash and investments available to us. I have still not yet set up the third deposit of funds with the Florida Trust. It's just been a matter of time restraints. I need to get more familiar with them and actually get online or get familiar with their procedures and get that in place. But it is my intent to start to put some extra effort towards that before year end at least. And the status of the cash reserves, you can see we're right at $5,033,000. And we have about $240,000 in addition to that available for the R&R account. Now, the only way to replenish that R&R account is the difference at year end between our total revenues for the year and our total expenses in general fund. Our projections are that that's going to be a very minor amount again this year. Hopefully it'll be in the positive. I can add some funds to it. This last year we actually were in the negative by a small amount, so I wasn't able to use any more than the surpluses we had from the previous years, less what had already been spent to have a balance to work with. So we've got about $240,000 at this point. I'll tell you, there are some questions I've had or some inquiries I've had that lead me to believe that we're going to have probably before year end easily another $50,000 of that spent. So we'll be reporting on that at the end of our next quarter report. The balance of the report is, as y'all are familiar with, includes a write-up by each department on their activities during the quarter. I would call special attention to the golf course, which is on the next to the last page, which is numbered 92 of 321. That is a summary provided by the golf course and their tally really of how they've had less revenue actually than the year before. Not only because due to the irrigation projects, I know people were concerned last year when that was approved that they would have a drop off in revenues, and it wasn't so much that as the weather. There's been a severe impact on the amount of play because of the heat in June, according to the Golf Pro. And then, of course, rain doesn't help. But I think it is worthy to note that their memberships, however, are on the increase. And they've done some promotions and done some things to make, by eliminating the initiation fee, I think that's helped with the number of people that have signed up for annual memberships. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Okay, anybody got questions? No questions down here, no questions there. Okay. I'd only comment that, we're down $193,000 on the golf course. We're probably, given that July was no prize as far as heat record, and August has started that way, and now maybe we're gonna have a rainy season. But, it's gonna be tough for them to make that up. But, let's hope. Okay, what we need is a motion to approve the third quarter budget and make that recommendation to the city council. I need a second. I got a second.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Okay, that's unanimous, we've got that done. Okay, thank you, Ken. Okay, public input? No public input. Okay. Ken, do you have any staff matters?
I do have one thing just for the record.
Microphone?
Thank you. One thing just for the record is Deanna Farmer, you know, she is absent with an excused absence tonight, but she followed that up with a email basically resigning from the committee. She's got other obligations. It just makes it difficult on her to participate. So her appointment is Council Person Coy, and she has been notified today of the vacancy, and it would be her choice to name another member to replace Deanna.
Okay. Along those lines, I'm sure you all saw the email from Joe Griffin, the city manager, which spoke for itself. I just make a comment that I've suggested to Mr. Griffin just briefly, that we make it very clear this next time around in November, when people are wanting to join this committee or city council people are appointing, that there are obligations in June, July, and August, and it's tough. I know a lot of people go on vacation, and we've run into that continuously. I've been doing on this committee, going on 9 years, 8 years or 9 years, something like that. And it's always a problem. But as Mr. Griffin said, it's important. The city council wants the input from this committee. When I stand up here and look at them and look around, they're paying attention, and they want to hear what we think, because there are normally 7 of us, and it gives them a fair representation across the whole city, and that gives them an idea. So we're just going to, if you're going to renew with your city council, or you're selected at large, please think about it. And if you can't do it, don't. And if you can, fine. Okay. We probably will not have another meeting before the end of the budget year, September 30th. Although, if there is continued discussion at the city council before the 2 public hearings, come to think of it, I'm thinking of the calendar. The meeting this Wednesday, the 10th, is the last meeting in August. There are no more city council meetings in August because this chamber gets used for early voting. And I think there is there were 2 public hearings. And whether there's a meeting before that, I don't know.
Yes, the public hearings in September are scheduled for a special meeting on the 12th, which is a Monday night, and the final reading on the 28th.
Okay. So, assuming that the council is happy with the 3.8556, then that's what's going to be carried into the budget hearings, although they can make changes at that meeting. Historically, they don't. But, so that's where we are. Okay, but there's a possibility we might have a meeting, very slim. So the next meeting wouldn't be until after the election, and we'll deal with that later. Okay. Questions, comments by anybody on the committee?
You said the next meeting is contingent,
Well,
or did we have a date?
we don't. I think if there was major discussion Wednesday night and the council goes in another direction, then this committee, what do you gents think? You want to regroup and discuss what they came up with and be prepared for the meeting on September 12th. Let's see. We could have a meeting at the 12th. You said the 12th is a Monday. Let me grab a calendar. I suppose we could, Labor Day is the 5th. You know, we could meet something like the Wednesday, the 7th, possibly. I don't think it's going to happen, but it's just worth mentioning for you to think about. And, I mean, after Wednesday, we'll know, so we've got some time to talk about it. Okay?
Thank you.
All right. Any other matters? Being none, the committee is adjourned.